Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Not Minding My Own Business. My name is Russell Farbiars, and I am thrilled to have with me here on our inaugural episode Al Dallao of ArcPoint Labs of Reading, Pennsylvania. Thanks for being here, Al.
Thank you, Russell. I really appreciate the opportunity to be the first guest on what hopefully will be a long run of interviews and episodes for you.
Well, thank you. So let me introduce Al a little bit. Uh, Al has been in business for a little over 6 years at Berks County ArcPoint Labs of Reading, which is a local leader in drug and alcohol testing. They provide full service toxicology lab and offer a comprehensive array of high quality drug, alcohol, DNA, and background screening services to businesses, government agencies, law enforcement agencies, schools, and testing for individuals seeking personal, confidential, and affordable screening services. Now, I've also been told to make it sure that everyone knows you're not a vampire. You don't take anyone's blood. Isn't that right?
That come into our facility, you're not going to be standing here with a lot of people, for lack of a better word, are either sick or requiring, other healthcare services. We're focused on employer and individual drug and alcohol testing solutions. That's our business.
Okay. So those tests do you use urine, hair, nail testing? Um, what what sort of specimens do you collect in your lab?
Quite a few of our clients will provide urine samples for their drug testing. A typical urine drug test looks back about 3 to 5 days of any prior usage of any substances. And in many cases, if they need a longer view, specifically quite a few custody cases come to us. If they need a longer view, we'll do hair or nail testing. Hair testing looks back about 90 days of prior usage, so you get a better idea of any history of potential substance abuse. And fingernails and toenails can look back anywhere from 6 months to a year.
You get all the great specimens in your office, don't you?
Yeah, I can't say, Russ, that I grew up dreaming to be a urine specimen collector. I mean, most kids talk about being a fireman or a policeman or even a lawyer, but I can't say that that was on my radar screen when I was a child.
So, how did you get into this line of work?
It's actually a kind of a totally different career for myself and my co-owner, my wife, Anne Marie. We both found ourselves on the short end of the stick when it came to some layoffs in the businesses we were in. And we decided to look at opportunities totally different than what we had experienced. Amory has a background in sales and marketing and worked in both industry and in sales. I also have a background in manufacturing and also business development. So when we found ourselves out looking for something to do, we talked to a franchise consultant, and the franchise consultant gave us 5 or 6 different opportunities to consider, and this was the one that kind of came to the top of the pile. ArcPoint Labs is a national franchise group. We have over 100 locations nationwide, with our location here in Berks County, which Anne Marie and I own. And then there's also additional locations here in southeastern Pennsylvania. There's a location in King of Prussia, Center City, Philadelphia, Doylestown, and also Trenton, New Jersey.
Wow. And so can you tell me what is something that the average person might not know about your industry?
It's fascinating. We will get the phone calls that say, I think somebody is doing drugs. Okay. We want to test for everything. Well, that's the first misnomer that we'll explain to people, is there really isn't a test for everything. And then we'll spend time with the client, basically a brief discussion about what drugs of concern they have. And then based on that discussion, we will tailor a test or pick a test that we think basically meets their requirements. For employers, it's mainly a very basic drug test. Mainly urine testing is what most employers want. But when we have individuals that come in here specifically for court cases, um, we'll try to make sure that whatever test we're offering covers the substance or drug that they may be concerned about. So we don't test for everything. We try to test for what we believe the concern is or what the potential um, uh, accusation is.
And I think I'm guilty of calling you on more than one occasion and saying, Al, I have a client who or a party that needs to be tested. Test them for everything, and you've probably shaking your head and rubbing your temple, going, oh, geez, here we go again. But and so I have to say, you do an excellent job of explaining, the different tests. Now, for any of our listeners who maybe are employers or in the employment realm, can you explain a little bit about what type of test you might actually be using in that
Uh,
area?
we recommend for many of our employers, many of the employers that we work with directly here, we actually recommend an instant test. It provides a result, as it's called, instantly. And so it gives the employer the advantage of basically knowing where they stand almost immediately after the test. A donor will come in here and we will collect the sample. If everything is negative on the instant test, we'll report it, and the employer most of the times have the results before the candidate gets to the parking lot. So that's usually the first thing that we would recommend. And then again, we have a discussion about the different tests that we offer. We offer a 5-panel instant, which is a favorite of many employers. It's a very basic test that includes amphetamines, methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, as well as marijuana. And then we have advanced tests that also include benzodiazepines, barbiturates, ecstasy, and oxycodones. We're finding more employers are going for what we call the 10-panel test. The difference in price is relatively insignificant, and it gives them better coverage and a better idea of what kind of employee they're going to be ultimately bringing into their workforce.
That definitely makes a lot of sense for employers these days. What is the what would you say is the strangest request you've ever gotten for testing?
We've had we've had quite a few different things that come through here. We do DNA services, so most of the time it's relationship DNA. So if you need to know if a parent and a child are basically related, we do quite a bit of that testing. But we also do some forensic type testing just for information purposes. So we have people that come in with clothing articles, cigarette butts, um, uh, Q-tips. Trying to think what other types of items we've tested over the years, but basically what we're trying to do in those cases is it's most of the time a suspicion that somebody in the house is, for lack of a better word, doing something they shouldn't be doing with somebody else that isn't in the house. So toothbrushes, we've basically proved relationship on toothbrushes. So yeah, I think those are probably the most bizarre things we've had. But the flip side is on the drug side, we do get requests for drugs that may not commonly be tested for. We're starting to see more and more employers as well as individuals in the community that want us to add fentanyl to the drug test. As most people have probably heard, that is a very powerful opiate that is out there killing people right now. And so we are starting to do more and more fentanyl testing in addition to our standard drug testing that we do for employers and individuals.
Okay. What would you say is your biggest successes and biggest failures in your business?
Boy, it's hard to measure successes and failures. When we embarked on this journey over 6 years ago, we really didn't know what the community was going to be looking for. And so we kind of decided to try to cover all the bases and see, where the interest was. Probably the first thing that we were mildly successful with was testing for individuals specifically for court purposes. And that was probably the first segment of our business that really developed into something that we definitely wanted to focus on. The other area which also surprised us was the need for the DNA relationship services. We have quite a few individuals that come in here either right after the child is born or in some cases later in life, that they want to know who their parents are or want to confirm that the child is theirs before they sign a birth certificate. And so, that has been a surprise to us how much demand there is for those types of services. In terms of failures, I don't know if we really have seen anything that necessarily fails. We've had portions of our business that we thought would be in greater demand that aren't. One of the areas that surprises us is, we expected to see more parents bringing teens in concerned about substance abuse. And much to our surprise, we don't see that. Parents are reluctant to bring their child in and have them tested. Um, so in terms of, I won't say it was a failure, but it was a surprise to us that, when you hear so much about the teen drug and alcohol use in the community, we have a resource here that can provide confidential and relatively understandable results, but yet, we haven't seen the demand that we would have thought.
You seen any changes in what the community is demanding, from before the pandemic to now?
It's an interesting question. We are seeing a workforce now that is working from home, and so we have employers that will do random testing, in some case monthly or quarterly. And what that means is, they will provide us with a list of their employees, and then we will generate a random list. We have a software program. And so let's say, Russ, you have 100 employees and we select 10 employees for testing. We've seen an increase in some of those employees testing positive. It's either marijuana. We've seen a slight spike in cocaine usage, methamphetamines. So I don't know if that's directly attributed to the pandemic or not, but when you recognize that people are sitting at home a lot more, they have a tendency to, for lack of a better word, fall into bad habits. So we've seen an awful lot of that, and the flip side is we're seeing a lot more employers now realizing that when they don't see the employee every day, they've got to put some sort of steps in place to ensure that the employee is maintaining good a good status in terms of these types of requirements. The other thing we do is we work with programs that are mandated by the state for healthcare professionals. And unfortunately, we did see some folks that slid back during the pandemic. Again, the pressures that are out there. I think everybody understands that, things have changed and the pressures we're faced with day to day are a lot different than they were prior to the pandemic. And that causes people to slide into habits that normally they may not have fallen into if those pressures hadn't existed. The healthcare professionals, like I said, we've had some people that have slid back. And as well as, like I said, also you see it with the employers.
That's interesting. I hear in the news, that one of the unfortunate side effects of the pandemic it is an increase in recreational drug use for the reasons you stated.
Sure.
And it sounds like from what you're saying is unfortunately you're seeing that is somewhat accurate.
Yeah. I mean, it's not I won't say it's like a huge spike where 20% of the people who come in here are testing positive. That's not the case, but you just see a slight uptick in things that you would normally never see that are starting to come into play. As an employer, it's difficult now if you do have a workforce at home. What do you do if you do suspect somebody is under the influence of drugs while they're at work at home. Um, we've talked to quite a few employers about, reviewing their drug and alcohol policies and trying to understand how would you approach that if you think you have an employee that's on a video call, then let's say they've been drinking and you believe they're intoxicated. Can you record them? You know, you as an attorney, I don't know how you would advise them. Can you go to their house and specifically tell them, because you're working from home, I'm going to take you to Arc Point and have you tested? You know, so there's a lot of things that the employer needs to think about, in terms of some of the new dynamics that have crept into the workforce during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's helping a lot of change at a very rapid pace. And
Yeah.
though, human beings in general don't tolerate that well. I think Berks
Mhm.
Countyans even less so.
Yes, that's correct. The other thing, you talk about recreational drugs. The other thing that we have seen during the pandemic is an explosion, and I call it an explosion, in the use of medical marijuana.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the cards have gotten easier to obtain, and so quite a few people are, qualifying for medical marijuana. It's interesting, in the fact that the state in May reported that there's about 750,000 people that now have cards in the state of Pennsylvania, and that's growing quite rapidly. But only somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400,000 are actually going to the dispensaries to get their medical marijuana.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so I don't know where the other 300,000 are, um, but there is, growing concern with employers about, are people using these cards to hide behind their recreational use of marijuana, and statistics may lead you to that conclusion.
So what do you do, or what do employers do when someone tests positive for marijuana, but they have a medical marijuana card?
It really if you go by the ideal, okay, the ideal says in the law says that if the employee is in a safety sensitive position, you have the right to uh, displace them from that position. Um, so, the first thing I always remind employers is, if you're testing for marijuana, medical marijuana cards come up, make sure your policy incorporates language around how you recognize that usage. And then secondly, make sure that you've identified what are considered safety sensitive positions. And so I'll give you a prime example. Okay, here I sit in a chair. Okay, I sit in a chair most of my day. Okay, other than when we're dealing with clients. Um, I'm not on ladders. I'm not playing with electricity other than turning my computer on and off every day. It's unlikely that I could qualify as a safety sensitive position based on what I'm doing today. Now, if you're out in a manufacturing operation and you're working around chemicals, you're working around heavy machinery, you're up on ladders, those types of jobs are probably could be considered safety sensitive because you could potentially hurt yourself or hurt other people in the operation. So that's the first thing I tell employees. You don't have to accommodate the cards if it's a safety sensitive position. That's
Mhm.
the ideal world. The reality of the world today is, with the job shortages and the a need for employees, many employers are starting to make accommodations where they're basically accepting the medical marijuana card, um, no matter what.
Mhm.
Um, so, to your question, what do they do if they have test positive and they have a medical marijuana card? Most employers are at this point just basically saying, okay, you've identified a reason, and we're going to accept that reason and keep you employed.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely creates some interesting issues, and I've always been a little concerned because there's a conflict, as I'm sure you know, between state law and federal law because the federal government still considers marijuana a Schedule 1 substance, and have you seen any interplay between that that's caused problems for people?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of federally mandated testing for the Department of Transportation. Uh, People may or may not be aware that a truck driver that's driving basically a big rig, anything over 26,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, is subject to a specific DOT drug test. It's a urine test. They're required to do that at pre-employment, and then they're also required to be in a random program that's mandated by the Department of Transportation. So they're subject to random testing, not only for drugs, but also alcohol. Um, Included in that test, as you pointed out, is marijuana. So we're starting to see more and more drivers, especially the drivers that haven't been in the workforce long. I don't know if they don't understand that marijuana is illegal when it comes to the federal mandates. But we're starting to see more and more of folks coming in here that are testing positive for marijuana, and then they either lose their job or they go through rehabilitation steps to get their job back. So, uh, as you know, Russ, you drive from state to state, and you say, okay, I'm gonna drive to let's use Colorado. I'm in Colorado. I'm going to say, okay, well, it's legal here. I can use marijuana. Well, if you're a truck driver, you can't do that. The other thing that the other thing that I mentioned to people here in Pennsylvania, and this is all employers, uh, Pennsylvania still has not legalized recreational marijuana. So if your employee is in Colorado and says, okay, I'm going to take advantage of the legalized marijuana, and they come back to Pennsylvania and they get tested, uh, they're still subject to the Pennsylvania laws. It's not a matter of where you did it. It's about a matter of where you're being tested or where the employer is managing the test. So I caution employers, especially now with New Jersey legalizing recreational marijuana, that they need to be clear with their employees, especially as we head into the spring and summer, what your expectations are around
Yeah.
marijuana. Because as we all know, we go down to shore, and and somebody decides to do it while they're on vacation and come home and get tested randomly, they could lose their job. If,
Yeah, it's marijuana always, I think, presents a very interesting issue. When I was a prosecutor, which was, 10 years ago, I prosecuted a lot of cases where someone was charged with DUI for having metabolite
mhm.
in their system. And we also had a lot of cases where someone might have a small amount, I think it was under 30 grams, and the penalty generally was a $200 fine, but it was a lot of and since then I believe they had the district attorney has sort of expedited how those are handled. They're not all getting handled the same way they were 10 years ago. But when you're testing, I mean, are you testing for metabolite, and how long does that stay in your system?
Yeah, and that's the other disadvantage with testing for marijuana. Um, as I mentioned, with a urine sample, it typically looks back 2 to 5 days of prior usage, with the exception of marijuana. Marijuana, in this case THC, actually builds up in your fat tissue, whereas the other drugs of abuse will basically flush out with liquids. Um, so the problem is with building up in your fat tissue, it takes longer for it to basically leave your body. And so potentially, if you let's say use marijuana today, you could potentially still have it in your system 30 days from now. So that's another problem with it, is when did you do it? Um, did you do it 2 hours ago or did you do it 20 days ago? The tests, at least for urine, are not accurate enough to be able to tell you that. So to your point, how long does it metabolize? The metabolization of the marijuana is different than other drugs and creates problems. Um, there's technologies being discussed out there. Well, what if we had a technology similar to an alcohol breathalyzer? And there are companies out there exploring that. Um, the problem is with that is, the breath alcohol and the blood alcohol content, uh, that's been vetted out over many years. And, as you know, we have standards in terms of what is considered intoxication or under the influence that have been established and recognized by the courts and the industries that we service. With a breath, if you do something similar for marijuana, it could be years away until we have that sort of technology for marijuana. I hope I see it in my lifetime, but um, for today, the best we can tell you is, okay, probably did it within the last 30 days.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that someone is impaired or intoxicated by
That's correct.
marijuana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we coach employers on, in addition to the testing, is we will help them with policy and also how to identify people that are intoxicated. Um, what characteristics they may exhibit. Things like they're staggering, they're swaying, eyes are reddened, pupils are dilated. There's a whole bunch of different, uh, basically, behavioral or symptoms that may indicate that somebody may be impaired. So, we spend a lot of time with employers on how to document that to make sure they have themselves covered in case somebody does test positive. In this case, let's say they do test positive for marijuana. That that documentation says, okay, I smelled an odor. I noticed reddened eyes. They were either talkative or they were uh, uh, dozing. Those types of things are probably more important than the actual test result in terms of being able to support um, a termination or a discipline.
Interesting. Well, Al, I'd like to shift gears a little bit so that our listeners can get to know a little bit more about you. So, can you tell us, are you originally from Berks County?
I am. I was born in St. Joseph's Hospital back in the days when the dinosaurs roamed, that part of Reading. And I grew up in Perry Township, Shoemakersville.
Okay.
I lived there till I was 13, and then my family moved to northwestern Pennsylvania, and I spent 5 years out there and graduated high school, and came back to Berks County and uh, did a 4-year program at Albright, and then I moved into my first job actually down in Boyertown. I worked for at that time it was called Cabot, and especially metals and chemicals company, and I worked there for almost 17 years, and then I moved on to, at that time it was still Lucent, and then it went through quite a few iterations. I worked there for 13 years. So I've been, with the exception of, you could say, 5 years away, I've spent most of my life here in Berks County. Um, my wife and I currently live in Maiden Creek Township.
Nice. What would you say your fondest memory of the area is?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. I like that one. It's interesting, Russell. When I was growing up in Perry Township, we always we would take outings. Back in the days before video games and even cable TV. On a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon when we were driving mom and dad up a wall, we'd get in the car and we'd take a drive somewhere. And sometimes we'd put a picnic lunch in the car and we'd drive up to, let's say, the fire tower, or we would drive over to Lake Onalani. And it's interesting to this day, whenever I drive by Lake Onalani, being in Maiden Creek, I do that quite a bit. It's a very calming drive. It just reminds me of so many nice memories of that time. So, I can't say specifically, but Lake Onalani does something for me whenever I drive by it. It just brings me back to a place that was good. It was good for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that is a wonderful memory, and you know, I know that in some ways things were probably a lot simpler back back then.
Yeah, they were. You got you got on your bicycle. That was the other thing. You get on your bicycle and you drive those country roads, and somehow you'd end up down by the lake. And I don't think my mom ever knew how far we would ride our bikes and the
Maybe if
places we'd end up in. But
maybe it's better that way, you know.
yeah, no.
So, what is your favorite restaurant? Maybe in the Maiden Creek area.
Oh, wow.
I know that's tough these days because it's very
Yeah.
hard to really go out.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's we have curtailed quite a bit in terms of where we go out. There's so many good restaurants in Berks County. I mean, and growing up here, spending most of my life here, I hate to pick just one out because there's so many places I enjoy going. I mean, truthfully, as a standby when we don't really feel like driving very far, we'll go down to the third rail, which is right down in basic scenic downtown Blandon. Um, that's a place that we like to go. That's relatively local. But we could be seen at one at the Leesport Diner. We could be seen up in Kutztown at a few of the establishments up there. So you know wherever our feet land is our favorite restaurant.
And it's funny when I asked you the question, I was thinking about suggesting the third rail because I know that's in Maiden Creek, and that's a nice place. Um, so I know that you and Anne Marie are very community involved because that's how I know you. I met you, I believe, originally through the Northeast Berks Chamber.
Yeah.
But how do you how do you contribute back to the community? Like what do you do in the community?
We've been fortunate. We've met so many nice people as part of this business, either as clients or as you've mentioned, Russ, in some of the networking we do. Um, and that's led us into so many different things um, that have given us, an opportunity to help with the community. Personally, I am an active member with the SOS Berks Coalition. That's the opioid task force that was set up by Commissioner Barnhart and COCA, Council on Chemical Abuse. We were trying to think the other day, probably about 4 years ago. I serve on the education committee. I'm one of the founding members of the committee, and so we're trying to give back to the community in terms of awareness and trying to help people understand substance abuse and what it means and how people can help uh, basically overcome some of these terrible numbers that you see in the paper in terms of deaths and abuse. I also serve as a board member with Threshold Rehabilitation Services. They provide mental health services as well as services to help intellectually and disabled individuals. I'm a proud board member there, and I've been on that board several years. Anne Marie, my wife, is very active with St. Joseph Church in Northeast Reading on 8th Street. We also collect for their food bank, which has become a very critical need for that part of the community. We also have relationships to collect items for Opportunity House and also Safe Berks. We've also sponsored the blood bank. The Keystone Blood Bank will come here several times a year to give people an opportunity to give blood, which again, there's always a critical need for those types of things. Um, I'm sure there's other things I'm missing, Russ, but that. Oh, and I'm a Boy Scout volunteer. I forgot about that. Yeah. So,
You have any tips on the Pinewood Derby?
oh my, that's always a hot topic. Okay, because we want to hope that the cars have been cars have been made by the kids, but it's not hard for the adults to get wrapped up in it too because they're big kids. So
Yeah.
Pinewood Derbies are a lot of fun. It's wonderful to see the scouts at that age, and just the look in their eyes when their cars go down the track. And if they win a prize, it's like, it's the ultimate. But sometimes the parents get a little emotional, if the car doesn't run as fast as they thought it should. So we probably spend more time addressing parent concerns during those races than we do the do the scouts.
Well, my oldest son, this is going to be his first year in the he's in first grade, and we're going to be working on his car this weekend. So,
well, work it together, make sure he feels it's his car. And the first one's always a lot of fun because it's a learning for him. He'll find out how good his car is right out of the box, and then it'll be something he can shoot for the following year. And that's the other thing that's neat. I actually work at the district level in the Lehigh Valley, and it's nice to see the first timers and then the ones that have done maybe 3 or 4 derbies and see how they've grown, in terms of the quality of their car and how they carry themselves at the races. It's neat. It's really a neat part of the scout adventure that you get to be part of.
Yeah, it's definitely we're getting together with some friends who have done this before so they can sort of advise us on the production of the car.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a lot different than when I was a kid. I mean, my car had plastic wheels and nails for axles, and it didn't, nothing like the ones that are out there today. So
should be interesting.
You'll have a great time, I'm sure.
Thank you. Well, Al, this has been a lot of fun. I'm gonna give you the last word here. What is something that more people should be aware of about what you do?
You're not alone in these struggles, whether it's an individual or an employer. We're here to help. I like to tell people that we answer the phone. You're talking to people that are vested in what they do, have been at it now for over 6 years. And we do our best to try to make sure that we provide a solution that, makes sense for the situation. So, if you're dealing with a situation where somebody is under the influence or intoxicated, don't feel like you're alone, give us a call. If you have a family member that you believe maybe has a substance use disorder or is using a substance and you're not sure what to do, give us a call. Again, we answer the phone. And in today's world, that may sound pretty simple, but I'll tell you, it goes a long way when you can talk to somebody on the other end of the line that actually can help and give you some tips on what to do next.
Well, you're absolutely right. Sometimes all it takes is just being able to reach out and actually get someone to make the difference. Well, thank you so much, Al, for being here on our first episode of Not Minding My Own Business. We look forward to sharing some other episodes coming up in the next couple of months. But again, thank you for being here today.
It was a pleasure, Russell. It really was an enjoyable time. Now I have to go back to work.
Unfortunately it's what happens, but thanks again. And then we'll be back with more episodes of Not Minding My Own Business in short order.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.